November 22nd began like any other day for Officer J.D. Tippit, an 11-year veteran of the Dallas Police Department and a World War II vet. At around 12:45, about 15 minutes after JFK was killed, he saw Oswald at this intersection. He stopped his car, and for some reason, Oswald walked right over to him and began a short exchange of words. Oswald seemed initially pretty happy to see him, according to the people who saw the interaction, but quickly got very, very flustered. Tippit opened his door and began to walk around the hood when Oswald is supposed to have fired 5 shots. 3 hit Officer Tippit in the head, 1 in the temple, and 1 missed entirely. Witnesses report hearing 3 shots, followed by Oswald sighing something like "poor dumb cop" or "poor damn cop," and J.D. Tippit was dead. But if you think that's the end of it, the assassination of J.D. Tippit is perhaps more interesting than the death of JFK, simply for the number of people who go missing or die mysteriously investigating it. Minutes later, the manager of a shoe store down the road saw someone pretending to window shop as cop cars sped by. Then he ducked into the Texas Theater without paying for a ticket, so the cashier at the theater called the cops, and the shoe store owner flagged them down, and police began to surround the building. But I want to backtrack a little bit to that altercation that actually ended up taking the life of J.D. Tippit. Why would Oswald happily have walked up to a cop car? Witnesses said that he was pacing in front of his house nearby and remarked he seemed to be waiting for somebody. There exists a theory that he became a patsy at the Cuban embassy in Mexico City. I've already talked a little bit about that, but here's how the theory goes. The Bay of Pigs had just failed, and now you've got all of these CIA-trained and contracted militiamen, very heavily armed. They all want to fight. They want to go invade Cuba, but they're in Mexico City, and they're all clustered right around the embassies of communist nations. He could have been approached by a couple members of Alpha 66, and I have more theories on that. I'll kind of posit later in the video, but they could have said, "Oswald, we're the actual agents of the Cuban Communist government. Of course Castro wants to operate in a sort of degree of plausible deniability, so of course we had to kick you out. But if you kill the president, or you kill a fascist, then we will get you a flight to Mexico and then fly you to Havana." And Castro had just taken over a couple of years ago. A lot of people thought that this was probably feasible. He's a revolutionary president, right? So if a car pulls up after he'd killed the president, of course Oswald would happily walk up to it thinking, "It's my ride out of here." Of course, these guys never would have actually done that, and he fell as a patsy. Eddie Benavidez is another strange assassination related to the death of Officer J.D. Tippit. His brother, Domingo Benavidez, told the police that the shooter looked exactly like Oswald, but when he turned to run, the back of his hair tapered off differently. Domingo told his brother, Eddie, that he'd been warned by cops to stop telling the media the back of his head looked totally different, but he told him he liked the attention, so he kept going to the press. Soon, Eddie was shot in the back of the head while drinking beer on 2nd Avenue, and the case was marked as unsolved. Eddie's father-in-law, J.W. Jackson, thought it was a case of mistaken identity because Eddie and his brother Domingo looked so similar. He began his own investigation and was killed in his own house. Police were driving a squad car that day and saw a black-clad masked killer escape with a gun from the window of J.W. Jackson and didn't bother trying to pull him over. And here's yet another strange discrepancy in the shooting of Officer Tippit. Nancy Mooney was a stripper working for Jack Ruby at the time and provided an alibi to the police about the shooting death of a man named Warren Reynolds. Warren had actually witnessed Tippit being killed and told Robert Groden that the killer wasn't Oswald. In early 1964, Warren was murdered and police brought in Daryl Garner. However, Mooney gave him an alibi and the cops let him go for lack of evidence. Days later, Miss Mooney was arrested and hanged herself in her jail cell with the stockings she was wearing. There was never an investigation. And this building at 223 South Ewing Avenue in Dallas is the former apartment of Jack Ruby. After reporters showed up to investigate, many of them began to die very strange deaths, including one, if I remember right, whose home was broken into, and he was killed with a karate chop to the back of his neck. Of course, his notes went missing, and makes me wonder what they found in Jack Ruby's apartment here.